The boy came out of the valley like something the mountain had shrugged off. That was Riva Drummond's first thought, standing at the window with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in her hands 20 minutes ago, watching the light change across the Absaroka Ridge when the figure appeared on the road below. Not riding, not hurrying, just walking with the kind of measured, rationed pace that belongs to someone who has learned through hard experience that speed costs energy. And energy is a thing you start counting like coins when the world has had its way with you for long enough. He was young. That registered first, and it troubled her, because the walk did not match the age. The walk was old, patient, ground down, and stripped of everything that was not strictly necessary to the act of putting one foot after another. But the body doing the walking belonged to someone who could not have been more than 20, and might have been less if the territory had done what it usually did out here in Montana in the spring of 1881, which was to age a person 2 years for every one they actually lived. His coat hung from his shoulders like it had been cut for a broader man, or taken from one who no longer needed it. The left sleeve had been patched at the elbow with a square of canvas that looked like it had once been part of a grain sack. His trousers were tucked into boots that were cracked across both soles, and the left one was held together at the ankle by a strip of saddle leather that had been knotted and reknotted so many times. The knot itself had become the structure. He carried nothing. No pack, no bedroll, no rifle, no saddlebag. Just a tin canteen on a frayed strap across his chest and his hands loose at his sides, and the particular expression on his face that comes when a person has stopped expecting anything from the next mile of road, but has not yet found a reason to stop walking it. Riva knew that expression. She had seen it on men who came through after the grasshopper plagues, after the bank collapses, after the kind of losses that leave a person standing but no longer quite whole. But she had never seen it on a face this young. There was something else. The boy was thin. Not lean the way working men get lean, carved and functional. Thin the way hungry people are thin, the body pulling from its own reserves because nothing from the outside is coming in. His cheekbones sat high and sharp under skin that had been burned dark by altitude sun, and there was a hollowness below his jaw and along the tendons of his neck that spoke of weeks without enough, not days. And yet he did not stagger. He walked the road with the quiet, private discipline of someone who has made an agreement with his own body that they will not fall down today, and who intends to hold that agreement until the body has no choice but to break it. Riva set the cold coffee on the sill. "Someone on the road," she said. Behind her, Asa Drummond did not look up. He was sitting at the kitchen table with the ranch ledger open in front of him and the pencil still in his hand, though he had not written anything in some time. He was staring at the column of figures the way a man stares at a verdict he already knows but is not yet ready to speak aloud. And then Riva said something that made him look up. "He is on foot," she said, "and he is coming to the gate." They had been on this land for 34 years, Asa and Riva Drummond. Iron Bend Ranch, 640 acres of foothill grass and creek bottom, and high timber running east from the Absaroka Range, along a valley that had no name on any map but theirs. They had come here in 1847 with a deed that was barely dry, a wagon with a split axle, and the kind of conviction that belongs only to people who are either very brave or too young to understand what they are walking into. They had been both. They built the first cabin with wood they felled themselves from the stand of lodgepole pine on the North Ridge. Riva had driven the mule while Asa dragged the logs down the slope, and they had notched and stacked and chinked through the whole of that first summer, while the valley watched them with the patient indifference of a place that had already seen 100 ambitions come and go and had outlasted all of them. By the second year they had cattle. 12 head bought on borrowed money from a rancher in Bozeman who told Asa he was either the most determined man he had ever met or the most foolish, and that time would decide which. By the 5th year they had 40 head and a real barn and a root cellar and the beginning of what Riva would later call the feeling of a place becoming yours, not because you own it on paper, but because your labor is in the soil, and your sweat is in the timber, and your voice is in the walls, and the place has begun, slowly and grudgingly, to answer back. They had raised 2 children in this valley. Their daughter, Mirren, had married a surveyor and was living in Helena now. writing letters twice a month that were full of city news and gentle suggestions that perhaps they should consider selling and coming to live closer to town, suggestions that Asa read and did not respond to with a silence that was its own answer. Their son, Colm, was in the ground on the ridge behind the barn. He had been 20 years old. It had been a morning in October of 1878, cold and clear, the kind of morning that fools you into thinking the world is in order. He had been moving cattle from the upper pasture, riding the same route he had ridden 100 times, when his horse stepped into a prairie dog burrow at a canter and went down hard and fast with the terrible sudden finality of a thing that cannot be taken back. Colm's neck broke before his body stopped moving. The horse survived. They found Colm in the grass with his hat 6 feet away and his eyes open to a sky that had no explanation to offer. That was 3 years ago. Riva still climbed the ridge some mornings and stood at the marker and said things to the air that she did not say to anyone living. Asa had not spoken his son's name aloud since the burial. This was not because he did not think of him. It was because he thought of him constantly, and speaking the name would have made the thinking a thing that happened outside his body, where it would be real in a way he could not yet allow. They were 65 and 62 years old, and the truth that had been settling over Ironbend for 3 years, the truth that sat in the ledger every morning like a stone Asa could not lift and could not ignore, was simple and absolute. They could not run this ranch alone. The cattle had dwindled to 26 head. They had lost 3 to a cougar in January. 2 had wandered through a section of fence on the west boundary that Asa no longer had the strength to repair properly, and by the time he found them they had fallen into a ravine and had to be put down. And 4 days ago, a calf had gone missing. Not just any calf. The last calf born to old Nan, a brindled cow who had been part of the herd since before Colm was born, and who had produced more healthy calves over her lifetime than any animal on the ranch. Riva had a softness for old Nan that she did not bother to deny. The calf had been 3 weeks old, healthy, a little heifer with her mother's brindle markings and a white blaze on her forehead that looked like it had been painted there by a careful hand. 4 days gone. Asa had searched the timber and the creek bed and the ravines on the west side for 2 days. He had found nothing. No carcass, no tracks after the first quarter mile, no sign of a kill. The calf had simply vanished into the country, the way small things vanish when the country is large and indifferent. And a man is 65 years old and his eyes are not what they were, and his knees will no longer carry him into the country, places where a calf might hide or a cougar might drag one. He had told Riva he would look again in the morning, but they both knew what that meant. It meant he had already stopped looking. It meant the calf was gone. Bracken knew it too. Bracken was their cattle dog, a kelpie with a grizzled muzzle and one ear that stood up and one that folded over, and the intense, worried expression of a dog who believes that every problem in the world is his personal responsibility and is perpetually distressed that the world keeps producing more of them. Bracken had been Colm's dog first. After the accident, he had transferred his loyalty to Asa with the solemn, unspoken dedication of a creature who understood that something terrible had happened, and that his job now was to stay close to the person who remained. But Bracken was old. 10 years, maybe 11. His hips were stiff in the mornings, and his runs had become trots, and his trots had become a determined, dignified walk that covered less ground each season. He had not been able to help with the search for the calf, and this, more than anything, seemed to weigh on him. He lay by the door each night with his muzzle on his paws, and his eyes following every sound from the darkness outside, listening for something that did not come back. This was the house the stranger was walking toward, a house that was tired in the way that only houses built by hand and held by will can be tired. Not falling apart, not abandoned, and just stretched to the end of what the people inside it could sustain without help that was not coming. Riva watched the boy reach the gate. She watched him stop, and she watched him do something that made her breath catch for just a moment, though she could not have said exactly why. He looked at the ridge behind the barn, at the marker on the hill. He looked at it the way a person looks at a grave when they know what a grave looks like, when they have stood at one of their own. Then he looked away and came to the door. He knocked twice. Not hard, not hesitant, The knock of someone who has learned that the way you announce yourself matters more than what you say after the door opens. Riva opened it before Asa could tell her not to. Up close, the boy was younger than she had guessed from the window, 18 at most, possibly 17 if the road had added what it usually adds. His hair was dark and had not seen a barber in some time, hanging past his collar in uneven lengths that suggested he had cut it himself with a knife at some point and then let the project go unfinished. There was a scar on his right hand, across the knuckles, old and white and healed long ago. And there was a bruise along his left temple, fading from purple to yellow-green, maybe a week old, the kind that comes from being hit with something harder than a fist. His eyes were what held her. They were gray, the pale gray of river ice in early spring, and they did not move the way she expected them to. They did not dart around looking for what could be taken or what might be a threat. They settled. First on her face, then on the doorframe, then on the kitchen behind her, then back to her face. The eyes of someone who has trained himself to see everything in a room in the first 3 seconds and then hold still so that nothing he has seen shows on his face. "Ma'am," he said. He held his hat in both hands. "I am sorry to come to your door without sending word." He paused, and in that pause Riva heard something she had not expected. The voice was quiet, steady, and careful with its words in the way that young men are not usually careful. A voice that had learned, somewhere in whatever had happened to this boy, that words cost something and should not be spent without thought. "I have been walking since Livingston," he said. 4 days. I can see you are running cattle, though from what I can tell from the road, you are running less than this land could carry." He was not boasting. He was not performing. He was offering evidence. "Your west fence line has a section down or near to it for about 40 yards south of where the creek bends. I could see the posts leaning from the road. And you have got a water line running to your second trough, the one between the barn and the near pasture. And it is either cracked or disconnected, because there is pooling at the base. That means you are losing most of what you are sending through it. The ground around the trough is mud, which means your cattle are standing in it to drink, and standing in mud is how you get foot rot in a herd, this time of year." He said all of this the way a doctor describes symptoms, not to alarm, just to demonstrate that he has looked and understood. "I know cattle," he said. "I have been working herds since I was 13. I know fencing, and I know water. And I know how to keep animals healthy through hard weather. I am not asking for wages. If you will let me stay, a place to sleep and meals is all I need. I will work your ranch and you will see what I can do. And if after a month I have not earned my keep, I will leave without argument." Riva looked at him. She looked at his cracked boots and his patched coat and the bruise on his temple and the scar on his hand and the canteen strap that had been mended with wire. She looked at his eyes, which had not wavered from hers throughout the entire speech, not with the aggressive intensity of someone trying to convince, but with the steady, almost resigned openness of someone who has decided to let himself be seen because he has nothing left to hide behind. "What is your name?" she said. "Torben Lusk," he said. From behind her, a chair scraped against the floor. Asa came to the door. He did not push past Riva, but he stood beside her in a way that changed the geometry of the doorway from an opening into a wall, and Riva saw the boy's posture shift in response. Not fearful, not submissive, just a recalibration, the automatic adjustment of a person who has learned to identify the decision-maker in any room and address himself accordingly. Asa Drummond was 65 years old and had once been the kind of man who could split a log with 2 strokes and carry a fence post under each arm. The years and the grief had taken some of that from him, redistributed the strength into stiffness and the size into weight. But his hands were still enormous, and his eyes still had the slow, evaluating quality of someone who does not speak until he has finished looking. He finished looking. "Where are you from?" he said. Torben met his eyes. "Bridger County, originally. East of here. My father had a ranch on the Shields River. Had. Yes, sir. Had. And what are you doing walking the road from Livingston with no horse and no gear and a week-old bruise on your head?" A pause. The boy did not look away, but something moved behind his eyes, a flicker of something being weighed and measured before it was allowed out. I had a horse until 8 days ago, he said. She went lame outside of Big Timber and I could not in conscience keep riding her. I left her with a farrier who said he would take her in exchange for treating the leg. The bruise is from a man in Livingston who did not like the way I asked for work. I did not hit him back because there were 3 of them, and I am not stupid. Asa studied him. And before that? Before Livingston and Big Timber and the farrier? Before whatever put you on this road in the first place? Torben Lusk was quiet for a moment. The wind came across the valley and pressed against the cabin and moved through the grass in the near pasture where the 26 remaining head of Ironbend cattle stood in the thin April light. That is a longer answer than I can give standing at your door, sir, he said. But the short version is that I lost something, and I have been trying to figure out what to do about it ever since. Asa looked at the boy. He looked at his hands, which were rough and calloused in the right places. The places that come from wire work and post-driving and leather and rope, not from bar fights or idleness. He looked at the boots and the coat and the canteen and all the evidence of a life that had been stripped to its components. Then Asa looked at Riva. Riva looked at Asa. 34 years of marriage had built a language between them that did not require words. A conversation that happened in the space of 2 seconds, conducted entirely in the eyes. She saw him weigh it. She saw him start to refuse. They had been through this before. Not with this boy, but with others like him, or who had seemed like him at a distance. The man in 1873 who stayed 2 weeks and left with Riva's mother's silver brush from the bedroom. The one in 1875 who drank until he could not stand and then wept in the barn until Asa had to drive him off the property. The one who seemed solid, seemed capable, worked well for a month, and then disappeared one dawn with the best saddle and $60 from the tin box in the pantry. 3 times burned. 3 times the cost of trusting someone you did not know and could not verify, and who came to you out of nowhere with nothing but a story and a need. The word no was forming. Riva could see it in the set of Asa's jaw, in the slight forward tilt of his shoulders, in the way his right hand moved to the doorframe as if preparing to close something. It was coming the way weather comes in the mountains, visible from a long way off, inevitable, already decided by forces larger than the moment. And it would have come. It would have arrived and landed and sent Torben Lusk back down the road toward whatever was waiting for him there, which by the look of him was nothing at all. Except that Bracken, who had been lying by the stove with his muzzle on his paws and his eyes half closed in the way of old dogs who have learned to conserve their attention for things that matter, suddenly lifted his head. His ears came forward, both of them, even the one that folded. His nostrils flared, and he made a sound that neither Asa nor Riva had heard him make in 3 years. A sound from the back of his throat, not a bark, not a growl, something older than either of those. The sound a cattle dog makes when something that belongs to the herd is nearby. Bracken stood up. His old hips protested, and he ignored them. He pushed past Riva's legs, past Asa, past Torben in the doorway, and he went stiff, locked onto something behind the boy, down the road, in the direction from which Torben Lusk had come. Riva leaned past the doorframe and looked, and her hand went to her mouth. Coming up the road, maybe 60 yards behind where Torben Lusk stood in the doorway, moving on legs that were still new enough to the world to be uncertain about the whole enterprise of walking, was a calf. A small calf. A brindle calf with a white blaze on her forehead that caught the thin April light like a mark placed there deliberately, and Riva knew her immediately the way you know your own. The way you know a thing you have been grieving for 4 days while telling yourself you were only being practical about its loss. It was old Nan's calf, the one that had vanished, the one Asa had searched for across 2 days of ravines and timber and creek bed until his knees and his pride could not carry him any farther, the one they had given up. She was alive, thin, her ribs visible under the brindle coat, her legs muddied to the hock, but alive and walking and pointed in one direction, not wandering, not drifting the way a lost calf drifts when it has no idea where its mother is. Walking toward the boy. Asa, Riva said. He was still forming the word. She could see it sitting behind his teeth. The no, loaded with 34 years of evidence and 3 bad experiences and the protective stubbornness of a man who has been stolen from and lied to and disappointed, and who has decided that the cost of trust is higher than the cost of doing without. He had earned that no. It was honest, and it was hard-won, and it was, by every reasonable measure, the right thing to say. "Asa," Riva said again, and this time her voice had something in it that made him stop. He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking past the boy, past the gate, down the road. Asa stepped forward. He looked. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The wind moved through the valley, and the grass bent under it, and the calf kept coming, one careful step after another. Her eyes fixed on the back of Torben Lusk with the single-minded focus of a creature that has found the one thing in a very large and frightening world that made the world feel smaller and less frightening. Torben turned around. He looked at the calf. He did not seem surprised. He seemed, if anything, slightly embarrassed, the way a person looks when something private has been made visible without their permission. "She has been following me since yesterday morning," he said quietly. "I found her in a brush thicket about 9 miles south, near the base of the range. She was tangled in some deadfall. I cleared it, and she stood up, and I walked on, and she followed me." He paused. "I tried to leave her twice. She would not stay left." He looked at Asa. "I did not know she was yours until I came close enough to see your brand. I was going to mention it, but we got to talking about other things." The calf reached the gate. She stopped and let out a sound, high and thin and searching. The sound a young animal makes when it wants its mother, and has been wanting her for days, and has held the wanting inside until the moment when holding it becomes impossible. From the near pasture, a sound answered, low and urgent and rough, with the particular desperation of a mother who has been calling into the dark for 4 nights and has heard nothing come back until now. Old Nan was at the fence. She had crossed the entire pasture at something close to a run, which for a cow of her age and dignity was an extraordinary concession. She was pressing against the rails, and her eyes were on the calf, and she was making the sound over and over. The deep guttural lowing that is not a word in any human language, but that means the same thing in every language that exists. Bracken was already at the gate. He had positioned himself beside the calf with the trembling, focused intensity of a dog whose entire purpose in life has just walked back from the dead, and he looked up at Asa with an expression that was as close to a demand as a dog's face can produce. Riva watched her husband. She watched the war in his face. The no was still there. It was strong, and it was justified, and it had 34 years of hard experience behind it, but it was fighting something now that experience cannot argue against. An animal had chosen this boy, not been led, not been roped, and not been tricked with feed. An animal that had been lost in 9 miles of mountain wilderness for 4 days had found this stranger and followed him home, followed him voluntarily, across rough country, on legs that were barely a month old, because something in the way he moved, or the way he smelled, or the way he existed in the world told that animal what it needed to know. You cannot teach a man to be trusted by animals. Riva knew that. Asa knew it too. It is not a skill. It is not a trick. It is a quality, and it is either in a person or it is not, and no amount of cleverness can counterfeit it. Asa looked at the calf. He looked at old Nan, who was still calling. He looked at Bracken, who was still demanding. He looked at the boy, who was standing very still and not asking for anything, just letting the moment speak for itself because he understood, perhaps instinctively, that anything he said now would be less persuasive than what was already happening. Then Asa opened the gate. The calf went through and found her mother, and what happened next was not dramatic in the way that stories usually require things to be dramatic. There was no music, no great gesture. Old Nan lowered her head and the calf pressed against her, and they stood like that in the thin afternoon light. The mother and the daughter, and the 25 other cattle in the near pasture shifted and resettled around them, the way a herd does when something that was wrong has been put right. Bracken circled them once, twice, a third time, and then lay down near the gate with his muzzle on his paws and his eyes half closed, and the deep, shuddering sigh of a dog who has been carrying a weight that has finally been set down. Torben watched from the gate. He did not enter the pasture. He did not approach the herd. He stood at the fence with his hands at his sides and watched with the still, quiet attention of someone who understands that this moment does not belong to him, that he was only the road the calf traveled, not the destination. Asa had not spoken. He was standing beside the gate he had opened, and he was looking at his cattle, and he was thinking thoughts he did not share. Riva knew some of them. She knew the shape of her husband's thinking the way she knew the shape of the valley, not every detail, but the contours, the places where the ground rose and fell, the places where water gathered. He was thinking about the three drifters, the silver brush, the whiskey, the saddle, and the $60. He was weighing those against what he had just seen, and the scales were not settling easily because Asa Drummond was not a man for whom feeling outweighed evidence, and 3 pieces of evidence is a hard thing to set aside because a calf followed a stranger home. But he was also thinking about the fence, 40 yards of west boundary down or leaning, which the boy had spotted from the road, which meant the boy had been looking at the ranch the way a rancher looks at a ranch, reading it for what it needs. And the waterline, the pooling, the mud, the foot rot warning. These were not the observations of a thief or a liar. These were the observations of someone who knew what he was looking at and could not stop himself from seeing what was wrong with it. And he was thinking, though he would not have said this aloud and Riva would not have asked him to, about the ridge behind the barn, about the marker on the hill, about a boy of 20 who had known this land the way this stranger seemed already to be learning it, from the outside in, by paying attention. Riva did not push. She had learned long ago that pushing Asa toward a decision was the surest way to push him away from it. She simply stood beside him and waited for the thing that was happening inside him to finish happening. It took a while. The light moved across the valley. The mountains held their snow. The calf nursed, and old Nan stood over her with the watchful, immovable solidity of a mother who has no intention of letting this one out of her sight again. Bracken lay at the gate and did not move. Finally, Asa spoke. "There is a room at the back of the barn," he said. He did not look at Torben when he said it. He looked at the pasture, at his cattle, at the calf that had come home. "It is not much. A cot and a blanket and a hook on the wall for your coat. There is a basin outside the door, and the pump works if you prime it twice." He paused. 1 month. You work this ranch for 1 month, and I will watch every move you make. If anything goes missing, if anything does not add up, if I get the feeling even once that you are not what you appear to be, you are gone before sunrise, and I will not be gentle about it. Torben nodded. "That is fair," he said. "It is not fair," Asa said. "It is what I have left to offer. Fair would be wages and trust and a proper start. I do not have any of those to give right now. All I have is a month in my suspicion and a cot in a barn." Torben looked at him. For a moment, something crossed the boy's face that was not gratitude exactly, and not relief, but something closer to recognition. The look of a person who has been told the truth by someone who did not have to tell it, and who understands what that costs. "That is more than I have had in a long time, sir," he said. "Supper is at 6, Riva said from behind them. She said it in the same tone she would have used to say the sun rises in the east. A fact, an anchor, a small piece of order in a day that had wandered far from the plan. Torben picked up his hat from where he had set it on the fence post. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She watched him walk to the barn. She watched him stop at the door and look back at the pasture, at the calf and old Nan and Bracken and the herd settling into the afternoon. She watched him look at it the way a man looks at water after a long time without it. Not greedy, just thirsty. Then he went inside. Riva turned to Asa. "Do not say it," Asa said. "I was not going to say anything," Riva said. "You were going to say something about that calf. I was going to say that supper needs starting, and that you should bring in wood before the light goes." She paused. "But yes, I was also going to say something about that calf." Asa looked at the ridge behind the barn, at the marker on the hill, at the place where his son was buried in ground that Asa had dug himself because he could not allow anyone else to do it. "Column's dog chose him," Asa said quietly. "That is what I cannot get past. Column's dog chose him." He picked up the axe from beside the porch and went to split wood, and Riva went inside to start supper, and neither of them said anything more about it, because some things, once observed, do not need to be discussed. They just need to be allowed to settle, the way sediment settles in water, slowly, until the water runs clear. Torben Lusk came to supper at 6 and was not late. He had washed his face and his hands at the basin and made some effort with his hair, and he stood at the kitchen door with his hat off until Riva pointed at the chair and said, "Sit," which he did. He ate the way hungry people eat when they are trying not to show that they are hungry. Controlled, measured, steady, not shoveling, not rushing. Just eating with the disciplined pace of someone who has learned that eating too fast after too long without food is a mistake. Your body will make you regret. But Reva saw his hands shake once when he reached for the bread, and she saw him close his eyes for just a moment after the first bite of the stew, and she put a second helping in front of him before he finished the first without comment. He said thank you. He said it quietly, and he meant it in the way that only people who have gone without can mean it, which is to say, completely. Asa watched him from across the table and said nothing during the meal. This was not unusual. Asa had never been a man who talked while eating, but Riva could see him watching. Watching the way the boy held his fork, which was properly. Watching the way he kept his elbows off the table, which was without being reminded. Watching the small, unconscious courtesies that are not taught but absorbed. The habits of someone who was raised in a house where things were done a certain way, and who has carried those ways with him even after the house is gone. After supper, Torben said thank you again and good night and went back to the barn. Reva watched him cross the yard in the last light. Bracken, who had been lying on the porch for the first time in 3 years instead of by the stove, stood up and followed him. Not asked, not called, just followed, the way a dog follows a person it has decided belongs to it, with the calm certainty of an animal whose judgment in such matters has never once been wrong. In the morning, Torben was already working. Riva came out at first light and found him at the west fence line. He had located the downed section, all 40 yards of it, and he was already 2 hours into the repair. She could tell it was 2 hours because of how much he had done. He had cleared the old wire, pulled the leaning posts, reset 3 of them in holes he had dug with a post hole digger he had found in the barn, and was stringing new wire with the smooth, unhurried rhythm of a man who has done this so many times that his hands could do it while his mind was elsewhere. He had not asked where the tools were. He had found them. He had not asked which wire to use. He had chosen correctly. He had not asked whether to repair or replace the posts. He had assessed each one individually, kept the 2 that were still sound, and replaced the 3 that were not. Every decision right. Nothing wasted. She brought him coffee at 7. He thanked her and drank it and went back to work, and by noon the west fence was whole for the first time in 4 months. He walked the completed section once, checking every join, testing every post with his weight, tugging every strand of wire. Then he moved to the water line. The water line was worse than he had described at the door. It was not merely cracked. The join between the main pipe and the trough feed had corroded through, and the trough itself had a fracture along the base that had been leaking into the mud for what Riva guessed was most of the winter. Asa had tried to patch it twice with pitch and cloth. Both patches had failed. Torben did not patch it. He dismantled the join, cleaned the pipe ends, fashioned a new coupling from a piece of scrap iron he found in the barn, and seated it with a precision that suggested he had done similar work many times before, but had never considered it remarkable enough to mention. Then he drained the trough, mixed mortar from creek sand and the bag of powdered lime he had asked Asa about that morning, the only thing he had asked about all day, and rebuilt the fractured section from the inside out. It took him until late afternoon. When he was finished, the trough filled clean and held, and there was no pooling, and the mud around the base began to dry in the spring wind. He was not finished for the day. Before the light failed, he walked the near pasture fence, the entire perimeter, with Bracken at his heels. Riva watched from the window as the boy and the dog moved along the fence line together, Torben checking every post and every wire join, Bracken trotting beside him with the renewed purpose of a dog who has been given back a reason to exist. She saw Torben stop at one section on the north side. He crouched and looked at something, a post, the ground around it, and the wire. He stayed there for a long time. Then he stood and walked back and came to the house and knocked. And when Asa answered, he said, "You have something testing your north fence." Something has been pushing at it from the outside. Could be elk. Could be something else. The wire is stretched, and the bottom strand is lifted about 4 inches off the ground. I would like to set it right tomorrow and add a lower strand if you have the wire. Asa looked at him. How did you know to check the north side? Your cattle, Torben said. They are bunching away from the north fence and toward the barn side of the pasture. Cattle do not bunch for no reason. Something on the north side is making them uneasy. Asa looked at the pasture. He had not noticed the bunching. He had not seen the pattern. He had been looking at his cattle every day for 3 years without his son, and he had not seen what this boy had seen in one afternoon of walking the fence line. He felt something. It was not a comfortable feeling. It was the feeling of a man who has been doing a thing alone for so long that he has forgotten what it looks like when someone does it well, and who is now being reminded, and the reminder is both a relief and a reproach. Go ahead, Asa said. Fix it. Torben nodded and went back to the barn. Bracken followed him. Old Nan's calf was at the pasture fence nearest the barn, standing with her nose through the rails, watching the boy cross the yard. She had been doing this all day. Every time Torben passed within sight of the pasture, the calf moved to the nearest point of the fence and watched him with the fixed, trusting attention of an animal that has decided who its person is. Asa saw this. Riva saw Asa see it. That night, lying in the dark with the wind pressing at the cabin walls and the sound of bracken settling outside the barn door drifting across the yard, Asa said to the ceiling, "He is either exactly what he seems or he is the most dangerous kind of liar there is." Riva was quiet for a moment. "Which you think?" she said. "I think Bracken knows," Asa said. "And I think old Nan's calf knows. And I think I am an old man who does not trust his own judgment anymore, so I am trusting theirs." He rolled onto his side. 1 month, he said, and I am watching every step. But Riva heard something under the words, something Asa probably did not know was there or would not have admitted if he did. She heard hope. Not much of it. Just a thread. Just enough to be dangerous. She lay in the dark and listened to the wind and thought about how hope is the most reckless thing a tired person can feel, and how it comes anyway, uninvited, the way a lost calf follows a stranger home. The weeks that followed were not dramatic. They were ordinary in the way that real work is ordinary, which is to say that the days were long and full of tasks that no one would ever write a song about, but that, taken together, amounted to something that mattered. Torben fixed the north fence. He was out there at first light the morning after Asa told him to go ahead, and when Riva brought coffee at 7, she found him crouched at the base of the section he had identified, studying the ground with the focused attention of a man reading a letter written in a language only he could speak. "Mountain lion," he said without looking up. He pointed at the ground. "She has been coming down from the timber at night. See here and here. The tracks are 5 days apart. Same animal, same approach. She is not hunting your cattle yet. She is learning them, watching their patterns, finding the weak points." He stood up. "That is what they do," he said. "They do not rush. They study. And then one night they come through and you lose an animal and you never hear it happen." "What you do about it?" Riva asked. "You make the fence not worth testing," he said. "And you make the perimeter uncomfortable for her." He looked toward the timberline. "I will walk the tree edge tonight. If I can find where she beds down during the day, I can make that spot unpleasant enough that she moves her territory south, away from your herd." Riva looked at him. "You are going to walk the timberline at night, alone." Torben glanced at her and almost smiled, which was the first time she had seen him come close to doing so. "She is not interested in me, ma'am. I am not her prey. She is studying your cattle, not your people. I will take Bracken. He will let me know if she is close." He went that night. Riva did not sleep well. She lay in the dark, listening for sounds that did not come, and thinking about a boy of 18 walking the tree line in the dark with a dog and no rifle, and she did not know whether what she felt was worry or something else, something older and more painful that she did not allow herself to name. He came back at dawn. He had found the cat's resting spot, a shallow depression under a shelf of rock about a 1/4 mile into the timber, littered with old scat and scratched earth. He had fouled the area thoroughly and built a series of small cairns along the timber edge at intervals, marking the boundary in a language the cat would understand. "She will test it once more," he said. "Maybe twice. Then she will move on. They do not fight for territory that makes them uncomfortable. They find easier ground." He was right. Over the following week, Riva found fresh tracks at the fence line twice more, each time lighter, more tentative. Then they stopped. The mountain lion moved south. The herd settled. Asa said nothing about this. But Riva noticed that he began leaving the barn door open while Torben worked, not watching directly, just making it possible to see. And she noticed that at supper, which Torben continued to attend at 6 without once being late, Asa's questions began to change. At first, they had been the questions of an employer, practical and bounded. "Where did you string the new wire? How deep are the post holes? Did you check the trough this morning?" But as the weeks passed and May became June and the grass grew thick in the south pasture and the creek ran full with snowmelt, the questions shifted. They became the questions of a man who is trying to understand not just what someone can do, but who someone is. "Where you learned water systems?" Asa asked one evening. "My father," Torben said. He had a spring-fed operation on the Shields. Gravity fed to 3 troughs across 200 acres. He built it himself over 6 years, and he taught me every joint and grade. A pause. Asa turned his fork. "A spring-fed system is not easy to build." "No, sir. You have to understand the land. Where the water wants to go, you cannot force water. You can only learn what it is already trying to do and help it do that more efficiently." Something moved in Asa's face. Riva saw it. It was the look of a man who has heard something said in exactly the words his own mind would have chosen, and who is unsettled by the recognition. Colm had said something like that once. Not the same words, but the same thought. The water knows where it wants to go. You just have to listen. He had been 16 when he said it, standing at the creek with Asa, watching the spring runoff carve new channels through the pasture. Asa had not thought about that conversation in 3 years. He thought about it now. He did not say this to Torben. He did not say it to Riva. He finished his supper and went to the porch and sat in the chair and looked at the mountains until the light was gone, and Riva let him be, because she knew what was happening inside him, and she knew that it could not be helped or hurried. It could only be allowed. Torben was good with the cattle. Better than good. He had the quality that Riva had seen in only a handful of people in 34 years of ranching, the quality of stillness. He could move through the herd without the herd knowing he had moved through it. He could stand at the fence and the cattle would drift toward him, not away, drawn by whatever it was in his presence that animals recognized and trusted. Old Nan's calf was the most obvious example. The little heifer followed Torben the way a duckling follows its mother, appearing at the fence whenever he crossed the yard, pressing her nose through the rails when he passed, standing at the nearest point of the pasture when he worked the barn. It was absurd. It was impractical. It was also, Riva admitted privately, one of the most purely good things she had seen in a long time. But there was the other thing. The thing she could not settle. Torben worked without being watched. He never entered the house uninvited. He treated them with a respect that lived not in words, but in the small automatic gestures of a person who was raised to notice the space they occupy in someone else's world. Holding a gate, stepping aside on a narrow path, asking before he moved anything in the barn, even things that clearly needed moving. And he never, not once in 6 weeks, talked about where he had come from. Not evasively. He did not change the subject with the sharp, obvious deflections of a man hiding something criminal. It was subtler than that. It was the way a person moves around a wound that is still open, the careful navigation of someone who has learned exactly which thoughts are safe to touch and which ones will draw blood if handled. Bridger County originally. My father had a ranch on the Shields River, working since I was 13. These were the edges of the story, the frame without the picture, and inside that frame, 2 years of silence that had turned a rancher's son from Bridger County into a boy walking alone through Montana with cracked boots and a bruise on his head, and nothing to his name but a canteen and a way with animals. Riva watched and waited. She knew the story would come. She knew it the way she knew weather, by the pressure in the air, by the feeling of something building that would eventually need to break. She just did not know when, or what it would look like when it did. In the pasture, the calf grew. Along the timber line, the mountain lion did not return. At the supper table, the conversations grew longer. And in the barn at night, a lamp burned late, and Riva sometimes wondered what a boy with no books and no possessions did with the hours between supper and sleep, and whether he spent them the way she suspected he did, which was lying on the cot in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and thinking about whatever it was that he could not yet bring himself to say. It came in July, on an evening when the heat had finally broken, and a storm was building over the Absaroka Ridge, the clouds stacking up in columns of gray and purple that looked like a city being constructed in the sky. They were sitting after supper. Asa had his pipe, Reva had her mending. Torben was at the table with a piece of harness leather he was repairing, his hands moving with the automatic precision of someone whose fingers know the work so well they have released the mind to go elsewhere. The stormlight came through the window and made everything in the room look like it was carved from amber. The silence was the comfortable kind, the kind that happens between people who have spent enough time in the same space that the absence of talk is not an absence of anything. Riva set down her needle. "Torben," she said, "tell me about the Shields River." His hands stopped, not abruptly, not the way a person's hands stop when they are startled. Slowly, the way a clock stops when the spring has finally unwound. He looked at the leather in his hands for a long moment. Asa took the pipe from his mouth but did not speak. He watched Torben the way he watched the weather, patiently, without trying to influence it. "My father built the ranch from nothing," Torben said. He spoke to the leather, not to them. His voice was quiet and had the careful, deliberate quality of someone choosing each word the way you choose steps crossing a frozen creek, testing before committing. He came from Bozeman in 1863 with a land grant and a mule, and he worked it alone for 4 years before he met my mother. By the time I was born, he had 200 acres and 60 head, and a house he had built with timber he felled himself. He paused. The stormlight shifted. Thunder moved somewhere behind the mountains. "My mother died when I was 11. Fever. It was quick." He paused again. 3 days, start to finish. I did not understand that a person could be there and then not be there so fast. I kept thinking she would come back. I kept thinking there had been a mistake. Riva's needle was still. Asa's pipe had gone out, but he did not relight it. "After that, it was just my father and I," Torben said. "He taught me everything. Cattle, fencing, water, horses, how to read the land, how to read the weather, how to read an animal's body and know what it is telling you before it knows itself." He was quiet for a moment. He was a good man, patient. He did not talk much, but when he talked, it mattered. He looked at his hands, at the harness leather, at the scars and calluses that mapped a history the words were only now catching up to. He got sick in the winter of 1878. Not sudden like my mother. Slow, a cough that would not leave. He kept working. He would cough until he could not stand, and then he would lean on the fence until it passed, and then he would go back to work. I told him to rest. He told me the ranch does not rest, so he cannot rest. He said that every morning for 4 months. Thunder again, closer. The first drops of rain touched the window. "A man came in March," Torben said. His voice had changed, something harder in it now, something with an edge that had not been there before. He said he was from a land company in Helena. He said he had heard my father was unwell and he wanted to help. He said he could offer a loan against the ranch, short term, and fair interest, enough to hire hands and keep the operation running until my father recovered. Asa's eyes had narrowed. Reva saw it. She saw the recognition in her husband's face, the look of a man who has heard the beginning of a story and already knows how it ends because he has seen the same story told in a different voice with different names in his own valley. "My father signed," Torben said. "He was sick and he was scared and the man was persuasive and the terms looked fair on paper." He paused. They were not fair. The interest compounded monthly. There were fees buried in the language that neither of us understood. By the time my father died in June, we owed more than the ranch was worth. The rain came. It came against the window in sheets, and the room darkened, and the amber light became gray, and Torben looked up from the leather for the first time since he had started talking, and his eyes were dry, but his voice was not. "I was 17, he said. "I went to the company in Helena. I asked them to renegotiate. I told them I could work the ranch and pay it back if they gave me time. They said no. I asked them what would happen if I could not pay. They said they would take the ranch." He was quiet for a long moment. "They took it in August. I had until the end of the month to leave. I sold what I could, which was not much. The cattle went at auction for less than half their value because the company had already told the buyers in the area that the ranch was distressed, and when buyers know a seller is desperate, they adjust their offers accordingly." His hands tightened on the leather, then released. "I left with what I could carry and about $40 and no idea where I was going. I have been moving since, working where I can. Losing jobs when the work runs out or the boss decides he does not need a hand anymore. Sleeping in barns when I am lucky, outside when I am not. I had a horse for a while. I told you what happened to her." The rain filled the silence. Riva picked up her needle. She did not sew. She held it the way a person holds something familiar when the world has shifted slightly, and they need a fixed point. "What was the name of the company?" Asa said. His voice was very quiet. Riva looked at him. His face was still, but his knuckles on the pipe were white. Torben looked at him. "Mountain West Land and Resource," he said. Asa set the pipe down on the table. He set it down carefully, with the exaggerated precision of a man who is controlling something inside himself that does not want to be controlled. "That," he said, "is who sent Judson Mercer to my gate." The room was very quiet. Torben looked at Asa. The air between them had changed. Something had connected that had not been connected before. A thread running between a ranch on the Shields River and a ranch in the Absaroka foothills, between a 17-year-old boy who lost everything to a company that fed on desperate men, and a 65-year-old man who was being circled by the same predator. "You knew," Torben said. "Not until right now," Asa said. "But I am not surprised." He looked at the table. "Mercer has been coming here for a year, always reasonable, always patient, always talking about what is best for us, how the land is too much for two people our age, how winter is coming, and would we not rather be comfortable in town with money in the bank. He never threatens. He just waits. He waits for us to get tired enough to say yes." He looked at Torben. "That is what they do. They wait for the tired." Torben's jaw tightened. Something moved through his face that was not anger exactly, but something older and colder and more patient than anger. The expression of a person who has seen a thing clearly for the first time that they have been trying to see for 2 years. "I did not know it was the same company," he said. "I did not know until right now." Riva set down the mending. She looked at the boy sitting at her table with the storm light on his face and 2 years of rootless grief behind him and a piece of harness leather in his hands that he had been repairing for a ranch that was not his but that he had been treating as if it were. "You have been looking for something since you left the Shields River," she said. He looked at her. She held his gaze the way she held her needle, steadily, without trembling. "I think you have been looking for ground that answers back," she said. "A place where your work means something, where what you build does not get taken from you while you sleep." He did not answer. He did not need to. The answer was in the way he sat in that chair, in the way he held that leather, in the way he had walked every foot of fence and rebuilt the water trough and tracked the mountain lion and carried old Nan's calf home on a road he had every reason to keep walking past. The rain hammered the roof. Lightning turned the valley white for one long second and then let it go. "I know," Torben said quietly. "I know that is what I have been looking for." Judson Mercer came on a Tuesday morning in late August, when the summer had reached its full height and the valley was heavy with heat and the creek had slowed to a trickle in the dry spell that always came in the weeks before autumn remembered itself. He came with 2 men. They rode good horses and wore good coats and carried themselves with the relaxed, unhurried confidence of people who are accustomed to getting what they came for and who view the preliminaries as a formality rather than a negotiation. Mercer himself was a large man with a carefully trimmed beard and a hat that had cost more than everything Torben owned combined. He had the face of someone who smiled often and meant it rarely, the practiced warmth of a man whose business required him to seem like a friend, right up until the moment it required him to be something else. Torben was at the east fence when he saw them on the road. He set down the wire cutters and walked to the gate. He did not run. He did not hurry. He arrived at the gate 30 seconds before they did, which was exactly enough time to establish that the gate was his to stand at, and that approaching the house would require passing through him. Bracken appeared from somewhere, the way Bracken always appeared when something required his attention, materializing at Torben's side with the silent, focused intensity of a dog who has opinions about strangers and is prepared to express them through the medium of unbroken eye contact. Old Nan's calf was at the pasture fence, watching. Mercer pulled up his horse and looked down at Torben with the polite, assessing expression of a man who has encountered an obstacle and is deciding whether to go around it or through it. "Morning," Mercer said. "I am here to see Asa Drummond." "Mr. Drummond is not available," Torben said. "I manage operations for Ironbend. You can speak with me." A beat. Mercer's eyes moved from Torben to the house, to the barn, to the pasture and back. The two riders flanking him shifted slightly, not reaching for anything, just redistributing their weight in the way that men do when they want the redistribution to be noticed. "And you are," Mercer said. "Torben Lusk." Mercer's smile did not change, but something behind it did. A flicker of recalculation. The look of a man adjusting a plan he had assumed would not need adjusting. "Well, Mr. Lusk, I have been speaking with Asa Drummond for the better part of a year now about a matter of mutual interest. This land is more than two people can manage." "That is not a criticism. It is an observation. Drummond is 65 years old and his wife is 62, and this operation is declining. The herd is smaller than it was 3 years ago. The infrastructure is aging. Winter is going to be hard." He folded his hands on the saddle horn. "I represent interests that would like to help. A fair price. A clean transfer. The Drummonds can retire with dignity and means. Everyone benefits." Torben listened to all of this without expression. He let the silence sit for a moment after Mercer finished, the way you let a fire burn down before you touch the coals. Then he said, "Mountain West land and resource." Mercer's smile held, but his eyes changed. The warmth left them the way heat leaves a room when a window opens, all at once. "That is the name of the company you represent," Torben said. It was not a question. The same company that holds a portfolio of distressed ranch acquisitions across 3 territories. The same company that extends loans to struggling operations at terms designed to fail, and then acquires the property at auction for a fraction of its value when the borrower defaults. He looked at Mercer steadily. The same company that took a ranch on the Shields River from a dying man and his 17-year-old son 2 years ago. Mercer was quiet. The two riders had gone still in their saddles, the trained stillness of men who have felt the temperature of a situation change and are waiting to see which way the change falls. "I do not know anything about the Shields River," Mercer said. "No," Torben said. "You would not. That is not your part of the operation. Your part is the front end, the friendly visits, the reasonable tone, the patient waiting for people to get tired enough to stop fighting." He paused. "But the back end is where the real work happens, and the back end of Mountain West land and resource is a record of predatory loans and forced acquisitions that any territorial judge would find very interesting reading." "I would be careful with accusations, young man," Mercer said. His voice had lost the warmth entirely now. What remained was flat and functional, the voice under the voice, the one he used when the performance was no longer necessary. "I am not making accusations," Torben said. "I am describing a pattern, and I am telling you that Ironbend is not for sale. Not today, not next month, not when winter comes. Not ever, as long as the Drummonds are on this land, and I am standing at this gate." Mercer looked at him for a long time. He looked at this boy who was 19 years old and slight, and standing in the dust with a cattle dog at his ankle, and no weapon visible, and who was not afraid. Not performing courage, not bluffing, just standing in a place he had chosen to stand with the settled, immovable quality of a person who has learned, through the worst kind of education, exactly what happens when you do not stand. The two riders looked at each other. They had been hired to discourage. They were good at discouraging. But discouragement requires something to push against. A fear, a hesitation, a gap in the wall. And there was no gap in this boy. There was nothing to push against. There was just a fence and a dog and a pair of gray eyes that did not blink. "You are making a mistake," Mercer said. "I have made mistakes," Torben said. "This is not one of them." From the house, the sound of a door opening. Asa Drummond stepped onto the porch. He had the rifle in the crook of his arm, not raised, not pointed, just present, the way a fact is present, undeniable and requiring no elaboration. Mercer looked at Asa. He looked at Torben. He looked at the gate and the fence and the dog and the calf watching from the pasture and the rifle on the porch and the valley stretching away toward the Absaroka Ridge. And he calculated, the way men like him are always calculating, the cost against the return, the effort against the prize. "This is not finished," Mercer said. "Come back with a lawyer," Torben said. "Come back with papers. Come back with whatever you want to come back with. But know that when you do, I will be here, and I will have answers for everything you bring." Mercer turned his horse. The two riders followed. They went down the road at a walk, which was deliberate. The pace of men who want it understood that they are leaving by choice and not by force. But they were leaving. And Torben stood at the gate until the sound of hooves on the packed road faded to nothing, and the valley was quiet again except for the wind and the creek, and the sound of bracken exhaling, slowly, through his nose. He turned around. Asa was still on the porch. The rifle was still in the crook of his arm, and he was looking at Torben with an expression that Reva, standing in the doorway behind her husband, had not seen on his face in 3 years. Not since the morning he had watched Culm ride out toward the upper pasture for the last time, and had stood on this same porch with this same expression, the expression of a man watching someone he is proud of and terrified for in equal measure. "Come inside," Asa said. "There is something I want to talk to you about." Asa Drummond went to the back of the cabin, to the low shelf behind the stove, where things were kept that were not used and were not thrown away, and existed in the particular purgatory of objects that carry too much meaning to be treated as ordinary. He reached behind a tin of salt and a jar of rendered fat and brought out a bottle, not the bottle they used for cooking, not the bottle that sat on the counter and was opened without ceremony when the evening was cold or the day had been long. A different bottle, a bottle with a cork that had not been pulled in 3 years. He set it on the table. He took down 2 cups. He poured. He pushed one across to Torben, who looked at it and then looked at Asa with the careful attention of someone who understands that what is happening is not about whiskey. "You knew who they were," Asa said. "Before today. Before I told you the name. You already knew." Torben was quiet for a moment. "No, sir," he said. "I did not know it was the same company until the night of the storm when you told me. But I knew what they were. I knew the pattern, because I have lived inside that pattern. I know what it looks like from the inside." Asa turned the cup in his hands. He did not drink yet. He was doing the thing he always did with decisions, approaching them slowly, from every side, looking for the flaw. "My son," he said. Torben waited. Column. He was 20 years old. He died in October of 1878. His horse went down and his neck broke, and he was gone before anyone found him. Asa paused. He spoke these words with the measured flatness of a man who has rehearsed a sentence so many times in his mind that the words have been worn smooth of everything except their meaning. He knew this land. He knew the water and the grass and the animals and the fences. He knew where the pastures go, sparse in dry years, and where the snow drifts deepest in winter, and which sections of fence the elk test every spring. He looked at Torben. He asked the same questions you ask. He noticed the same things you notice. Something passed between them, not a word, not a gesture. Something older than either of those. The silent acknowledgement of a parallel that neither of them had drawn deliberately, and that both of them could feel. "I am not trying to replace your son," Torben said. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that trembled, the way the surface of water trembles when something moves below. "I would not do that. I could not." "I know," Asa said. "That is not what I am asking." He drank. He set the cup down. "I have been thinking about something since April," he said. "Since you brought that calf home. No. Before that. Since you walked up that road and looked at this ranch and saw everything that was wrong with it before you reached the gate." He poured again. This time he poured with the deliberateness of a man who is measuring not whiskey, but the weight of what he is about to say. "I want to make you an offer," Asa said. "Work through the winter with me. Stay. And in the spring, if this is still working, if you are still here and the ranch is still standing, and you still want to be part of it, I will go to the lawyer in Livingston and draw up a partnership. 30% of the operation, not wages. Ownership." The lamp flickered. The storm had passed hours ago, but the air was still charged with the memory of it. "In 10 years, Asa said, when I cannot do this anymore, you would have first right to buy the rest at a fair price. Not a fire sale, not an auction. A fair price set by an honest assessor and paid on terms that a working rancher can meet." He looked at Torben. "Because this land deserves someone who will work it the way it needs to be worked. And because I am 65 years old and I am tired, and I have been losing this fight for 3 years, and tonight you stood at my gate and fought it for me, and you did not flinch." He stopped. He started again, and his voice was rougher now, as if the words had to pass through something on their way out. "And because my son would have been 23 this October," he said, "and he would have stood at that gate the same way you did. And I cannot bring him back, but I can make sure that what he loved does not end with me." Torben looked at the cup in front of him. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands, the scarred knuckles, the calloused palms, the hands of someone who had built and lost and built again, and was being asked, for the first time in 2 years, to believe that building might be worth the risk of losing. His eyes were wet. He did not look away. He did not try to hide it, the way some men try to hide the things that move through them, as if feeling were a weakness, rather than the only honest evidence that a person is still alive. "Why," he said. His voice was rough. "You do not know me. Not really. 4 months is not enough to know a person." Asa looked at him. "I know that my dog chose you," he said. "I know that a lost calf followed you 9 miles through mountain country, because something in you told her she was safe. I know that you fixed a water system that I had been failing to fix for a year, and you did it without being asked, and you did it right. And I know that a man from the same company that took everything from you rode up to my gate today, and you stood there, and you did not let him pass." He paused. "I know enough," he said. Torben picked up the cup. He held it for a moment. His expression shifted, something rearranging beneath the surface, the way a landscape changes when light moves across it, and the things that were in shadow are suddenly, undeniably visible. "I will earn it," he said. "Every acre, every post, every animal. I will earn it, or I will leave." "I know you will," Asa said. "That is why I am asking." They drank. The whiskey was rough and old, and it burned going down, and neither of them minded. From the doorway, the sound of footsteps. Riva came to the table. She had a third cup in her hand, and she set it down beside the bottle with the quiet authority of a woman who has been married for 34 years to a man who consistently forgets that she also lives in this house. She poured for herself. She sat down. "Well," she said, "I see we are finally talking sense." And Torben Lusk, for the first time since he had walked up a road in April with cracked boots and nothing to lose, laughed. It was a real laugh. Not large, not loud. Just honest. The sound of something that had been held tight for 2 years finally being allowed to let go. Bracken, lying outside the door, raised his head at the sound. His tail moved once against the floor. Then he set his head back down and closed his eyes, satisfied that whatever had needed settling inside had been settled, and that his judgment, as always, had been correct. Mercer came back in October. He came with a lawyer in a pressed coat and a leather case full of documents and the same patient, inevitable tone he had used before. The tone of a man explaining arithmetic to someone who cannot count. He found Torben at the gate, Asa at the barn with the rifle, Bracken at the fence line with the focused, unblinking disapproval of a 30-pound conscience. And he found something he had not expected. Torben handed the lawyer a single piece of paper, a partnership agreement, filed with the county clerk in Livingston 3 weeks prior. Iron Bend Ranch, registered as a joint operation between Asa Drummond and Torben Lusk, with all future negotiations to be directed to their attorney, whose name and office address were printed at the bottom of the page. The lawyer read it. He read it again. He looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at the paper and then at Torben, and then at Asa on the porch, and for the first time the calculation behind his eyes produced a number he did not like. "This is a legally registered partnership," the lawyer said to Mercer, and the way he said it carried within it the entire conversation they would have on the ride back to Helena. The conversation about exposure and liability, and the difference between pressuring a tired old man and attempting to force a sale on a property with a registered co-owner who knows exactly what Mountain West land and resource is, how it operates, and who has, by the look of him, no intention of remaining quiet about it. Mercer did not speak for a long moment. Then he gathered his reins and turned his horse and rode back down the road, and he did not look back. He did not return. The winter came 3 weeks later, and it came the way winter comes in the Absaroka country, not gradually but all at once, as if the mountains had been holding it back behind a door and had finally let go. 6 weeks of cold that cracked the water lines and froze the creek solid, and turned the mornings into a negotiation between what the bodies could do and what the ranch demanded. Torben was out before dawn every day. He broke ice on the troughs with a mallet. He carried feed when the pasture was buried. He walked the fence lines in snow that reached his thighs to check for breaks, and when he found them, he fixed them with hands that were numb and cracked and bleeding at the knuckles. And he did not mention the blood or the cold or the effort, because mentioning it would have implied that it was remarkable, and he did not consider it remarkable. He considered it the work. Asa worked beside him when he could, which was less often than his pride wanted and more often than his body should have allowed. They did not talk much during those weeks. The cold makes talk expensive. But they worked in the particular rhythm that develops between two people who understand each other's movements, the rhythm of handoff and anticipation, of knowing where the other person will be without needing to ask. Riva watched them from the window some mornings, the old man and the young one moving through the snow together, and she thought about how trust moves between people, not in the things they say, in the things they do when no one requires them to do anything, in the choice to get up before dawn and break ice on a trough that is not yours because you have decided that it is. They lost one animal that winter, an old steer who had been declining since autumn and who lay down in the snow one night in December and did not get up. Torben found him in the morning. He came to the house and told Asa, and they went out together and stood over the animal in the gray light, and Asa said he had been expecting it, and Torben said he had been watching him and hoping he was wrong. They buried the steer together, and neither of them said anything further about it, because the loss was small enough to absorb, and they both knew it, and saying so would have diminished what they had preserved, which was 25 living animals through the worst cold in a decade. By the time February came and the first thaw loosened the creek and the snow began to pull back from the south pasture like a tide retreating, something had settled at Iron Bend that had not been there since the October morning when a horse went down and a boy of 20 did not get up. Not the absence of grief. Grief was still there. It lived in the cabin the way the cold lived in the walls, deep and permanent, woven into the structure. Riva still climbed the ridge behind the barn some mornings and stood at the marker and said things to the mountain air that were between her and her son and no one else. But grief had made room. It had shifted, the way furniture shifts in a house when a new person begins living there, accommodating without disappearing, allowing something else to exist alongside it that was not a replacement but a continuation. The sound of boots in the barn in the early morning. The sound of a dog trotting beside a young man through the snow. The sound of supper at 6, and the conversation after that went longer now, ranging over fences and pastures and water systems and the price of feed in Livingston and the plans they were making for spring. Plans. That was the word. Not hopes, not wishes. Plans. The word of people who intend to be somewhere tomorrow because they have a reason to be. On the first warm evening in March, when the light had lengthened and the grass was showing in the south pasture, and the Absaroka Range held its snow on the high peaks against a sky, so blue it looked like something that had been built rather than grown. Riva found Torben sitting on the top rail of the south fence. He was watching the cattle move through the new grass in the late light. Old Nan was there, and beside her the calf, who was not really a calf anymore but a young heifer now, tall and strong and brindle, coated with the white blaze still bright on her forehead. She was grazing beside her mother with the settled contentment of an animal who has never again doubted where she belongs. Bracken was there too, lying in the grass near the gate with his muzzle on his paws, watching the herd with the quiet satisfaction of a dog who has overseen a difficult winter and considers the survival of every animal to be a personal achievement, which in some ways it was. Riva climbed the fence and sat beside Torben. Her knees informed her that this was not the activity they had agreed to support at the age of 62, but she managed, and she did not complain because complaining would have broken the stillness, and the stillness was worth protecting. They sat in silence for a while. "You wrote to someone," she said. Torben glanced at her. He was not surprised. He had learned by now that very little escaped Riva Drummond's attention, and that what she noticed, she kept to herself until the moment when mentioning it would do the most good. "A girl," he said, "in Big Timber." He paused. "The farrier's daughter. Nell. I met her when I left my horse. We talked for an afternoon while he worked on the leg. She asked me where I was going, and I said I did not know, and she said that was a strange thing to say, and I said it was a strange time." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the cattle, at the fence he had rebuilt, at the water trough that gleamed solid and whole in the evening light. "I wrote to tell her I am not moving anymore," he said, "that I have stopped, that I have found a place." He paused. "I do not know if she will write back. We will see." Riva looked at the valley, at the south fence, every post driven true, at the water line running clean, at the barn roof that Torben had reshingled before the first snow, working in the October wind for 2 days, without being asked because he had seen the weakness and could not leave it for winter to find. "When Asa and I came here," she said, "we had nothing. A deed and a broken wagon and a stubbornness that should have killed us both. And for the first year, maybe the second, I thought we had made a terrible mistake. I thought the land was too much and we were too little, and the distance between what we had and what we needed was going to swallow us whole." She paused. The light was doing the thing it does in the Absaroka Valley in early spring, turning the grass gold and the mountains violet and the sky into something that does not have a name in any language, because the people who see it understand that naming it would reduce it. "But you know what we had," she said. Torben looked at her. "We had ground that answered back," she said. "A place where what we built stayed built, where the work meant something, where you could put your hands in the dirt and feel the dirt push back, not against you, but with you." She looked at him. "That changes a person, Torben. Having a place that answers back, having ground that knows you." He was quiet. Below them, the cattle grazed in the long gold light. Old Nan's heifer lifted her head and looked toward the fence where Torben sat, and her ears came forward, and she held his gaze for a moment the way she always did, with the calm, unshakable certainty of an animal who had chosen her person 11 months ago and had never once reconsidered. "I know," Torben said. "I have known it since April, since I walked up that road with nothing and you opened the door before I knocked." Riva smiled. She did not smile often. When she did, it changed her face entirely, the way sunlight changes a landscape, not by adding anything, but by revealing what was already there. "I did not open it for you," she said. "I opened it because Asa was going to tell me not to. And after 34 years of marriage, a woman has to maintain certain principles." Torben laughed. It was the second time she had heard him laugh. It was easier this time, less surprised. The laugh of a person who is learning that laughter is something he is still allowed. They sat on the fence as the light faded and the mountains turned from violet to black, and the first stars appeared over the Absaroka Ridge. Bracken shifted in the grass and sighed the deep sigh of a dog who is exactly where he is supposed to be. The cattle settled for the night. The creek, free now of ice, ran clear and steady through the valley, going where the water wanted to go. Inside the cabin, Asa lit the lamp. The yellow light came through the window and fell across the yard like a hand reaching out. And Torben looked at it and felt something that he had not felt in 2 years and had thought he might never feel again. Not happiness exactly. Something quieter than happiness. Something that does not have a name because it does not need one. The feeling of a person who has stopped moving and discovered that the ground beneath them is solid, and that it knows them, and that it is not going to be taken away. You do not always know the moment when the drifting ends. Sometimes you are still looking at the road when the road has already stopped being yours. Sometimes a calf follows you home and a dog lies at your door, and an old man pours whiskey he has not touched in 3 years, and a woman opens a door she was told not to open, and none of it feels like an ending because it is not. It is a beginning. And beginnings, the real ones, are so quiet you barely hear them arrive.